Welcome, one and all, to the Library of Congress National Book Festival, Magic to Haunt You, innovative storytelling featuring authors R.M. Romero and Rose Zabo. My name is Meg Metcalf, and I am a librarian at the Library of Congress, as well as the Women's, Gender, and LGBTQ+ Studies Specialist. And today we are making history with the first non-binary panel at the National Book Festival. So welcome, everyone. Thank you. So today we are in conversation with R.M. Romero, author of The Ghosts of Rose Hill, and Rose Zabo, author of We All Fall Down. And we will be saving about 10-15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So please start thinking of your questions now. If you're feeling shy, you can write down the question and we will ask it for you, or you can connect with the authors at their book signings just after at noon downstairs. And the book signing lines are right next to each other in lines 10 and 11. So now, with a huge thank you to our sponsors who make this festival possible, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our authors. So I thought for any new readers in the room, we'd start with getting acquainted. So Rose, would you like to start and tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your book?
Sure, thank you. So I'm a non-binary writer from Richmond, Virginia. I primarily write horror, and my most recent book, We All Fall Down, is at least partially about my experiences of being a queer white person in a multiracial queer community that is chronically plagued by police violence. And so We All Fall Down is about a group of young queer people living in a city where magic used to exist and can only be revived through human sacrifice and the decisions that they make along the way toward deciding what they're going to do about that.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to have you. RM?
I'm R.M. Romero, and I am from Miami, Florida. And my book, The Ghosts of Rose Hill, is based on my experiences helping to maintain Jewish cemeteries in Eastern and Central Europe. It's the story of Ilana Lopez, a Jewish Latina girl who goes to visit her Czech aunt in Prague. And there she discovers an abandoned Jewish cemetery, which she decides to tend to, and meets the ghost of a boy named Benjamin, who's been dead for over 100 years. The two begin to bond, but there is a sinister force overshadowing the cemetery and Benjamin, and it becomes up to Ilana to save him.
So these books are very different, and yet they have so much in common. And I think for me, as someone who's been lucky enough to read both books, is the outstanding world building that happens in both. So I was wondering if you would be willing to talk a little bit, how do you build such fantastic worlds? You know, how does that come out of your mind, and what does that process look like for you as a writer?
Oh, me?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So I actually have an exercise that I do fairly frequently when I'm thinking about world building, which is that I don't start with geography as much as I start by creating a map of power within the world. I start by making like a little grid and filling the grid with factions and thinking about who are these factions, how do they interact with each other, what do they want from each other. In this most recent book, some of the factions were the police, the university, a coalition of monsters, and a group of witches. And I think about like what kinds of things do they cooperate on, who has power over who in any particular situation, and where are the places where they're going to run into conflict.
Wow, incredible. What about you?
So I am nowhere near as organized as Rose, although I very much admire that level of organization. I just sort of do things. I draw a lot from the real world and also from fairy tales and folklore, especially when I'm dealing with a region like Prague, which has this very rich tradition of stories. I just started pulling elements from all these different pieces and mixing them together in a way that felt organic, even if the mythos didn't align perfectly. You know, there's elements of Cuban folklore in this book, but there's also elements of Czech folklore, Jewish folklore, anything that felt like it was going to make an interesting piece of the story. I just threw it in there.
Oh, I love that. More than one way to write a story. Something else I really loved about both books is that both sort of highlight the importance of each generation and the many visible and invisible ties between each generation. And there's a quote from The Ghosts of Rose Hill that really resonated with me. "My entire family is still trying to escape history." And that hit me right in the feels. So this is kind of a heavy question, but I feel like it comes naturally from what we were just talking about. In both books, is history the real monster that's haunting us all? It's kind of heavy, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm very interested in history in my own work. I live in a city where the university that I work for has a long history of like exploiting the local community, of grave robbing, of body snatching, and I think one of the things that I feel consistently challenged to do is to think about like, what is my role in that history? What am I going to do to make my city better and safer for my students and the people who come after us? Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important that we reckon with history. My city, Richmond, Virginia, in 2020 took down a bunch of the monuments to Confederate generals that had really dominated the landscape in this very real and frightening way for a long time. I was very proud to see people in my community actively take steps to make those go away. And, you know, I don't think that writing is the same as activism, but I hope that by writing stories that confront our country's terrible and racist history, that we are able to remove some of those monuments from our own minds as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of monuments, cemeteries.
Yes, I really feel that all of us is haunted to some extent, whether that's what happened to our families, our communities, our country. When I'm in places like Poland and previously Ukraine, these spaces feel haunted in a very tangible way when I'm in these cemeteries that were created by communities that, for the large part, no longer exist, or they are too small to them to maintain these places. So when I was thinking about this book, I started to think, well, what if the spaces were literally haunted by the ghosts of history? And then how would someone reconcile with that? How would a young person specifically reconcile with that? And what relationship would she have to her own past and to the past of her people and this city that she had found herself in?
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because neither book is classified as like historical fiction, yet history is so much a part of each story. And I kind of wonder if fiction can be a better outlet for kind of reckoning with these social issues that we're dealing with. So what do you think?
I mean, I think that I think fiction is not a substitute for action.
Right.
I feel really strongly that storytellers in particular have a responsibility at some point to step off the page and into action. I was really moved in a conversation earlier to hear R.M. Romero talk about the work that they do rehabilitating Jewish cemeteries. I think that fiction at its best motivates us to take right actions. And I really hope to create fictions that inspire people to step off of the page and into action.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on that, RM?
So there's a tweet that's going viral right now about fiction versus nonfiction, and I wish I could remember who actually tweeted it, but they said that fiction is learning through imagination. And I feel that that's really true. It isn't a substitute for real-world action. It isn't a substitute for direct testimony from people who were involved or who were victimized by certain situations, but it can offer us a different lens onto that. And especially with young people who connect so strongly to fiction. We see young people coming to events like this to hear authors they love speak, creating fan fiction, fan art, creating entire communities based on the fiction that they love. And sometimes that does motivate them to go out into the real world and make change, or to even just internally change the way that they have viewed different issues.
Well said. Well said.
I like that.
That was great. So speaking of genres, genres like gender can be very fluid. So I've seen magical realism, applied to both books, and I'm curious, is that how you feel is that how you identify with your book as a magical realism, or would you identify it in a different genre, and or are there other styles of writing that you're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely deeply influenced by the work of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's often considered to be the father of magical realism. I started reading his work in Spanish when I was very young. I think the first story I read was A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. And I was so shocked by it and my students, when I read it with them, are often shocked by it because the characters in that story don't behave well. They behave very normally, or maybe not normally, but they behave in very flawed and human ways. Like in that story, they find an old man with wings. They assume he's an angel, and so naturally they lock him in a chicken coop and charge admission to see him. And I think that I was very influenced from an early age by the idea that stories can both challenge us to be better than we are and can also challenge us to confront who we currently are. And so I really love the way that magical realism suggests that just because magic is present doesn't mean that people aren't going to behave in these really flawed and human ways. So, yes.
Absolutely.
I think pretty much everything I write is magical realism because that's just sort of my experience of reality in general. I live in a very strange city. I live actually in Miami Beach, which is an island that there are more cats than people on. I see people walking around with lemurs on their shoulders. I see Santeria sacrifices under palm trees. And when I'm in Eastern Europe, I again see these spaces that really feel like there is a presence there, even if I can't see it for myself. So that has always been my way of looking at the world, and it definitely comes through in my writing, where even my family history is filled with strange disappearances, miraculous escapes, things that technically are mundane. Technically they did happen, but it's very easy to put a magical twist on it.
Amazing. So speaking of difficult characters, I'm wondering, do any characters give you, in writing these books, were there any characters that were harder to write than others? It's just a question I've always wanted to ask an author.
Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. There's a character in We All Fall Down called Jack, who is exactly the kind of person who I used to really admire when I was young. Somebody who is very self-assured and seems very cool and seems like they have everything under control. And one of the real challenges for me of writing this book was getting inside the mind of the kind of person who I used to admire, but who, as an adult, I can now really see as deeply flawed and very willing to hurt other people in service of herself. This character in the story ultimately makes very bad decisions that impact everybody around her, and that hurt basically everyone except her first. And writing from the point of view of this character was at times very painful, but I wanted to write from this perspective in order to illustrate the processes that people go through as they come to the realization that they need to change fundamental things about who they are. So it was very difficult. There were times where I had to sort of pull back and remind myself that I was not this person, that I was telling a story about this person. There were times where I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about horrible things that this character had done. It was really challenging.
I will say, Jack reminded me, I don't know if we have any Battlestar Galactica fans in the room, but Jack reminded me, maybe it was just the hair, a little bit of the Starbuck character. Just maybe because of the hair and also the problematic choices. Have you seen it?
I've seen a little Battlestar Galactica.
They might just have the same haircut, but that's what I was imagining while I was reading it.
I think that I based Jack much more closely off of friends of mine who, so when I was first living, can I talk a little bit?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So when I was first living in Richmond, it was very exciting for me to come out as queer and to come out as non-binary, and there were a lot of people in the community who really embraced me in particular. And then I started dating a black man, and a lot of people in that community suddenly had like no love or respect for him. And so Jack, I feel like, is very closely related to people who I initially really admired and respected, and then eventually came to see as fundamentally flawed and deeply in need of, a fundamental shift in their thinking because of the way that they were treating somebody who I loved.
Absolutely. That sounds really hard. So any difficult characters from you?
So The Ghost of Rose Hill is mostly told from the perspective of Alana in first person, but there are 5 interludes that take place from the perspective of the villain. And it was very creepy to crawl into his head because he is such a human monster. He is a textbook narcissist. You know, he only cares about himself and his own well-being. And he's doing an incredible amount of harm to children as he does this. So it was eerie to try to get into his head and have him justify what he was doing, and to know that this type of character completely believed everything he was doing was perfectly fine because it got him what he wanted. And he was certainly based off of people that I've known who very much are that self-centered, and also off of a particular historical figure who I really do view as a monster. So it was a challenge to adopt his perspective for a little while.
Stories do need villains, right? They need all types of characters. So I'm curious if I could ask a little bit more about the writing process. How long did it take to write this particular book?
10 years.
Oh my goodness.
I was living in Richmond, and I started getting like this little inkling of an idea for this book. And a friend of mine was going to illustrate it as a comic. And then he sort of fell away, and I kept tinkering with it and circling back to it and putting it down and picking it up again. I feel like I write in these sort of like almost like sedimented layers, like the way that, like dirt piles up. Like I'll write something and then a little bit more of it will develop, and then a little bit more after that. And there were a lot of times where I like put this book down and walked away because it was like really difficult to work on. Because I didn't feel like I knew enough yet to say the things that, to describe the things that I was seeing and feeling. So yeah, it took a long time. It's probably been through like between 8 and 10 drafts. I'm hoping I can get a little bit faster as I get older, because I'm just not going to be able to produce at scale here.
When I started The Ghost of Rose Hill, it was really a scenario. It wasn't actually a story. I knew I wanted to write about the Jewish cemetery work that I do, and I thought, well, what if there's this girl who's working in the cemetery and she meets a real ghost, and that was it. I had nothing else. And then one day I was browsing the Folklore Thursday tag on Twitter, and someone had made a post about a vodnik, which is a river spirit that keeps the souls of the drowned in his teapot. And I thought, oh, okay, I've been to Prague. It's a very enchanted city where you feel like you could turn a corner and come across a monster or a fairy tale creature. I have a ghost, I have a protagonist, and it all came together really well. But because it was in verse, and it was the first time that I had tried writing an entire story in verse, it took me much longer than it usually does to draft the first draft. Probably took me about 6 months. Usually I can crank out the first draft of something in about a month and a half, but that first draft is not good. It's really me telling myself the story. Usually it takes about 6 months to edit it afterwards, but this one was particularly slow and painstaking, and especially in verse, where a verse novel is only about 30 to 35,000 words, but you have to make every single one of those words count.
Absolutely. So I'm also curious, we talked a little bit already about, the inspiration for building worlds, but I'm wondering what inspires you and keeps you going while you're writing, especially when you're writing really difficult characters? What does the self-care process look like for a writer, if there is one?
Oh gosh. One of the things that I feel is really significant to me in terms of my life is I don't know if I would describe this as self-care, but as not thinking of my writing as the only important thing about me. Being able to say, like, if I walked away from this, I would still, have like a worthy and admirable life. I've become recently very involved in union organizing, and I feel like that gives me a lot of stability in a way that, like, writing can be very destabilizing. Like, it's a beautiful thing, and I feel very honored to be able to do it, but it's very, it can be very lonely. And I think that working closely with other people on shared projects really brings me back to the world and also gives me a sense of connection to something bigger than myself when writing feels like sometimes like diving into like the most frightening parts of like my own experience and memory.
Very vulnerable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
I think Rose is right about all writers needing some kind of grounding force in their lives because, we do get very cerebral. We do float off into these fantasy worlds that sometimes are very bright and happy and sometimes they're very dark. So we always need some way to come back down. I go for walks, I swim in the ocean, I volunteer at a cat rescue, so I'm always petting cats and meeting people who love cats, which, petting animals helps to lower your blood pressure. So if you have a pet and you're having a really bad day, start petting them. It will help, even just a little bit. I also listen to a lot of music when I write. I feel like that helps me sink into the story, but it also allows me to unplug from it. If I have a specific song that I associate with a specific character or a specific book, I'll just listen to that song when I'm writing, and then afterwards I'll just shut it off. And that's my way of closing the door for the day.
I'm taking notes right now. Pet more cats.
So do you write at home, in public, a little mix?
I mostly write at home. I used to live in a very tiny apartment, and there was very like little privacy. But I would I had like my bedroom and like the laundry room in the back, weirdly, and I would stick a sign on the door, like a little sticky note that said "Great novel in progress," and that meant that like no one else who lived in the house could do laundry. Now I have a little bit more space. I have like a desk in like a main area. I also have cats. I like to watch the cats come and go while I write. I don't write in public a lot. I think like I really like to focus in. I get like tunnel vision when I'm working.
Yeah. What about you?
I do tend to write at home, and I tend to write at home very late at night. I've actually heard that after midnight, the part of your brain that really focuses on kind of the more critical aspects turns off, which makes sense because then you can really get into the flow of things and you're not thinking, is this good, is this bad, is this working? You're just putting your thoughts down on the paper and you're not self-analyzing quite as much. I do sometimes like to work. There's a very particular Starbucks near my house that has a very nice porch outside and the wind comes off the ocean. So I do like to go there sometimes if I'm feeling really stuck and I just need to be in a different environment because sometimes you do need to move around. You do need to just be in a different place. Maybe you can get a different perspective. It's almost like a different part of your brain gets activated. Same with, if you're ever writing and you're mostly typing and you're having a hard time, I've heard people suggest that you move to handwriting, which I have found to be helpful. I'm never going to be able to handwrite a novel and then type it up. That is far too much work, but helps give a little bit of a perspective change.
I assume that the setting that you're writing in could possibly also influence the setting, excuse my hair, share moment, also influences, the setting of your book. And I feel like we talked a little bit about, the big cities in both of these books, and that being the cities themselves almost being a character. And I'm wondering, they're both set in one city mostly, but were you inspired by any other cities or a mix of cities, or were there any particular places that you found really inspiring?
I think for me, like in terms of my own internal mythology, there's really only one city in the world, and that's Richmond, Virginia. I feel like very, like provincial in this way that like, I picked this one city very early on and I was like, I'm gonna do like a deep dive into it. I'm fascinated by everything about it, by like the strong overlaps between these communities that are like really invested in social justice and these communities that are really invested in hurting other people for profit. I'm fascinated by little things about my city, like the fact that we like changed all of the bus routes like the bus routes get a shout out in this book, where like one character is really thrilled that the bus routes have changed and are more like streamlined and convenient. And like a middle-aged woman who has like a foot injury is really frustrated because now she can't get where she needs to go. Yeah, I feel like I'm in this very long, like romantic relationship with my city that's very, like a constantly evolving process. And it's a real honor to write about it.
Wow, kind of making me want to move to Richmond.
You should move to Richmond.
So I only spent about a week in Prague, but one of the strange things that my writer brain does is it creates kind of a perfect map of cities that I really feel connected to in some way. Prague is very interesting because it was partially destroyed during the war, but there are also many parts of it that weren't. And there are also scars from World War II. There's actually bullet holes in a lot of the buildings in the center area. If you've ever seen the beautiful astrological clock right across the street, you can see these bullet holes from the last days of World War II when the Czechs and Slovaks finally rose up against the Nazis and kicked them out. I think the setting of The Ghost of Rose Hill was also influenced somewhat by where I live, because Miami Beach is an island, and that means it is kind of a liminal space, and that is where Ilana, the main character, finds herself constantly. She is between the living and the dead. She is between her mother and her father. She is even stuck between the magical and the mundane, and I always feel somewhat like that, living somewhere between the land and the sea.
Follow-up. Oops, there it goes. I have a follow-up for that because, believe it or not, I'm a big fan of cemeteries. So did you have a favorite cemetery that you visited during writing this book? Or any particularly creepy places?
So I really love the Czestochowa Jewish Cemetery. Czestochowa is a city that's about probably an hour away from Krakow, which is a very famous city. Schindler's List was filmed there, and that's where most of the real life things that are portrayed in that novel and in that book took place. And it is mostly intact, which is very surprising. A lot of Jewish cemeteries were completely destroyed during the war, and there's maybe one or two headstones, matzevot, left there. But they have these probably 70, 80-year-old trees. It's draped in ivy. It is green on a level that is hard to describe. Every single shade of green and gold appears in this place. And I'm also very fond of the Rohatin Jewish Cemetery in Ukraine, where a lot of my friends live. And I've been thinking about them a lot recently because of the war.
Absolutely. I looked up a few pictures of Prague cemeteries before this, and it's very moving. Very incredibly moving. Oop. How many more times am I going to do that today? We're almost done. You're almost done with me. So one of our final questions here is, what's next for you? What are you working on right now?
Right now I'm working on the sequel to We All Fall Down, which the first book of this 2-book series ends like on a very tragic note, like everything is bad for everybody, basically. And so it's both very difficult and very like affirming to now be writing the story of like, okay, so how do we fix this? How do we get back to a place where people can live and maybe thrive and be happy even? So I'm working through that right now. It follows the characters who previously we followed from summer to fall, and now we're following them from winter into spring.
Wow, I can't wait. It definitely felt like there was a sequel coming. Hopefully not in 10 years, but if you need a proofreader, just let me know. What about you?
I have another standalone novel in verse coming out next summer called A Warning About Swans, and it's about a swan maiden named Hildy who gets her magical cloak stolen by this upstart Bavarian baron, who then takes her to the court of Ludwig II. And there she meets the non-binary artist Franz Mendelssohn, who, as it turns out, has this ability to see souls when he paints. And they immediately see that she is actually this swan maiden and not this girl that she is pretending to be. And the novel is about their relationship and also how they plot to get this cloak back from Hildy so that she can return to her magical forest. And I hope to be able to talk about this novel fairly soon, but not quite. I have a middle grade novel that I've been working on that I've sort of billed as Jewish Narnia. It's about a girl named Anne Applebaum who travels to a magical flying forest inspired by Jewish folklore to rescue her twin brother from an evil witch who has kidnapped him.
Wow.
Can't wait to read that. So anything we haven't talked about before we open it up for questions? Anything either of you would like to talk about?
Oh, I think we're ready for questions. If
All
you
right,
are,
well-
Rose.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, so if you have questions, we have a microphone up in the front here. Please come on up.
I love your shirt.
Oh, I'm short. Hi. So you spoke a little bit about separating yourself from your work, and that really resonated with me because I find I don't write in the sense of books, but I do spend every week with friends playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm the one that runs the game. So I have to bring a lot of inspiration from a lot of different places. But my question was regarding how you stay creative without feeling like you're burning out and can't come up with new ideas, and how that might interact with you separating yourself from your work, and if you have any advice concerning that sort of staying creative and coming up with new ideas for people without feeling like you can't give anything else.
RM, do you want to go first since I went first? though?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah. So the phrase refilling the well gets used a lot in writing in creative communities. And the ways that I do that are I'll read books by other people, I'll listen to new music, I will watch new TV shows. And sometimes that can kindle a spark of inspiration that wasn't there before. And it can also just help me detach from whatever I'm working on and be able to enjoy somebody else's creativity or imaginary world. I also find art to be really inspiring. I'm a very visual person, so I will look at art books for television shows that I've really loved, or I will go onto Tumblr and look at beautiful fan art or just beautiful art in general. That really allows me to become inspired because I'll just see an image and I'll start thinking about what is happening in that picture. What if it was moving?
Yeah, I think that for me also, like, refilling is very important. I like that way of thinking about it. I get a lot out of teaching. I get a lot out of working like closely with other people and, like trying to contribute to my community. I find a lot of that stuff to be really fulfilling. I think like trying really hard to exist in the world and to not think of myself as like a brain in a jar is very helpful.
Thank you.
Hi. First, shout out to VCU. Heyo.
Hey.
Went there in 2014. But my question is, as somebody who's trying to get into the publishing, what was the querying process like for both of you?
So I've actually been through, I'm on my second agent now. The first one was a cold query where I just, a query letter is basically you trying to get an agent to want to read your book. It can be almost like the cover flap of a book. I read a lot of those. I went to the local bookstore and I just started reading those about how to pitch my book. And it was a very slow process. It took about 6 months for me to find an agent, and there was only, I think I got 4 full requests. And the agent who ended up becoming my agent, she actually asked for a revise and resubmit, where she gave me notes about, I loved your book, but there's still things that need to be fixed about it. And that really was it was pretty much a gut job. I love the skeleton, I love the characters, but there are plot elements that need to be fixed. And I was thinking about not doing it. I was like, well, there's no guarantee, she might not sign me. And then one of my professors from my MFA program said, no, you need to do this. You will regret it for the rest of your life if you don't, because either way, you'll wind up with a stronger book. So if you get any kind of feedback, I would really suggest taking it very seriously and seeing if you can incorporate it, if it resonates with you. If you get something that clearly indicates the agent didn't understand your book for whatever reason, you can discard that. So patience is key. I've heard that nowadays especially it's very slow, but one thing I've found out in publishing is that radio silence doesn't mean bad things. It can actually mean something good. It can mean that someone is taking the time to really read your book to try to figure out, is this the right agent for me? And also with agent rejections especially, it's not indicative of the quality of your work. It just means that that particular agent, they might even love it, but they don't know how to sell it. That may not be their specific area of expertise. I actually parted ways with my first agent because of that. She read The Ghost of Rose Hill and said, "This is wonderful. I have no idea who to submit this to editor-wise because I'm more into commercial fiction and this is more literary." So as hard as it is not to take rejection seriously, well, not seriously, but personally, I think that you have to be able to divorce yourself from your work a little bit and realize that publishing is a business, but that doesn't mean that your work isn't going to find a home.
Yeah, I would second, if you feel like you communicate with an agent and they really understand what you're doing and they have feedback, like take that feedback really seriously. I have a very unusual and non-representative agent story, which is that I queried my agent with a very early draft of my first novel, What Big Teeth. She said that she adored it and couldn't sell it. She asked me to send her the next thing. I worked on it for 3 years and sent it back to her. She said that she would try to sell it, but she had even more feedback. But I really felt like she understood what I was trying to do, and so I wanted to stick with her. Query more than one agent, like this doesn't usually work the way that it did. Like, you know, she and I got very lucky with each other. You really need to send it to more than one agent.
Oh, thank you.
Howdy. So y'all were talking about kind of identity and experience shaping the writing you do, and I was wondering if that's ever the other way around, because as someone who recently started identifying as butch, that came out of a lot of my writing. So I was wondering if there was ever like things you were writing that kind of provided a lens for you to look at yourself.
Great question.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
I would say absolutely. There are things I have discovered about myself through my writing by realizing, oh, I identify with this particular character, or why is that? Or even just realizing that I needed to work through something, because often the things that are kind of buried in our hearts come out in our writings that we haven't been able to articulate yet. You know, one of the things that I kind of found out as I was writing the non-binary love interest of A Warning About Swans is, oh, I think I'm a bit more fluid than I thought I was. That's really interesting. So I think that writing is a great way to explore the world around you, but also to explore parts of yourself that you may not have recognized until then.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so as well. I think that writing has often led me to realizations about myself and how I see the world. I feel like I write books mostly to like think through a difficult problem that I'm having, like in myself or in my community or in some aspect of my identity. Also, I see you've got a beautiful Dungeons and Dragons shirt on. I actually decided to transition after a Dungeons and Dragons game that I played in which I played a male character, and I was like, oh, I'm writing this like male character and having like so many emotions about getting to be this person. So yeah, I think fiction often informs who we become in real life.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry, it's kind of weird hearing my voice. What kind of music do you like to listen to when you're writing? Because, yeah, that's it.
Great question.
I love that question.
I listen to a lot of movie soundtracks for one thing. I love James Horner's music, especially the music that he did for M. Night Shyamalan's movies like The Village or Lady in the Water. I also listen to a lot of singer-songwriters like Regina Spektor, Tori Amos. Let's see, who else have I been really into lately? Often Spotify will just give me artists that are related to other artists. I find that that's a great way to discover new people. There are some times when I'm really deep into a scene where I don't actually want to listen to music with words that I can understand because I'll get distracted. So I'll listen to music in languages that I don't know. So it's beautiful, it's emotionally resonant in some way, but I'm not trying to kind of pick out what the lyrics are saying and even analyze the lyrics.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. So it's very clear that through both of your books, place is incredibly important and it's a main facet of how you tell your stories. So through the construction of both of your books, how has your sense of place evolved and how do you consider the way you interact with it now?
Let's see, I think that I have an even deeper connection to these cemeteries after writing The Ghost of Rose Hill. when I did a lot of the writing and the editing of The Ghost of Rose Hill during the pandemic when I couldn't travel abroad, so I was really forced to rely on memory. And this feeling of great longing came over me as I was writing this book because I really wanted to be back in Poland doing this work. So I feel like it offered me a greater appreciation of the work that I do, of the places that I help to maintain, and of the other people who do it as well. So I was absolutely thrilled to be able to go back in June. I think it added a level of emotion that I think wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that writing about my city has like really compelled me to take action within my city, and has made me feel a deeper sense of connection to place. It was like really profound for me, for example, to get to take part in the Black Lives Matter protests in my city in 2020. It felt not only like my responsibility, but my like privilege to be involved in a situation in which we could potentially change my city for the better. I think place is so important. I think we often want to think of setting as like separate from conflict or separate from action, but like the communities where we live our lives every day are our main sources of conflict and our main sources of love and hope and joy. And so I think they're super important to storytelling and super important to the way that we live our lives. I don't like living disconnected from a place.
Thank you.
Hi. Do you have any advice for aspiring young writers?
Write what you're afraid of. Write the story that you think is too big, too amazing, too much for you, because you will find that it's not. You came up with it. And if you really want to write it, you'll be able to, and it will actually take you places that are incredible.
Get comfortable talking to people. I was a very socially anxious person when I was younger, and I think it was because I was like imagining people as very different from they were. One of the things that's really helped me as both a writer and a person is to just simply ask people questions about themselves and their lives, and to really see myself as having a responsibility to listen to people when they're talking to me. It also helps you get good at dialogue because you've heard a lot of different people talk.
Yes.
I hope that helps.
Thank you.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Hi, just thank you both so much for being here. I know everyone really appreciates it. I was wondering specifically about The Ghost of Rose Hill, why you chose to write it in verse rather than as a typical prose novel, and whether that ended up impacting the story in any way.
I think it did end up impacting the story. I originally started writing it in verse as a challenge to myself. I'd always written poetry, but short poems that are less than a page. And after reading books like The Poet X, I thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if I could try and do something similar? And I think it did impact the story in that it's a story that where music takes a large role in it. So I really leaned into that aspect heavily to make it lyrical, to make it almost like it was a symphony in and of itself.
Thank you.
So we're so sorry we're out of time, but we are going to be, well, not me, but they will be signing books downstairs starting at noon. So bring your questions downstairs and get your books signed. And please join me in thanking our wonderful authors today.